Hi, I'm joined today by Clint Gagel, Sales Director for Fiora Brands. Clint, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So we're here to talk about a very hot topic since the pandemic, toilet paper. And everyone remembers the crazy shortage we experienced at the beginning of the pandemic that caused many consumers to panic and hoard. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, very interesting 18 months for sure in the paper world. So if you think about it, with the pandemic-related shelter-in-place orders that we had starting last spring, everyone was staying at home rather than going to their jobs, their places of business, their schools, et cetera. They were home for several months, right? So what we saw was consumers began to really, buy more at the stores and hoard, lots of staple products, not just paper, but paper was definitely one of those staples. Just so happens that toilet paper, and to a certain degree, paper towels were pretty high on their list. And if you think about the paper business as a whole, it's typically broken down into retail sales, away from home, and then also private label. On the retail side, we saw exponential growth, but then conversely, the away from home side, declined substantially due to, again, people not going to their businesses, to schools, to stadiums, to hotels, and things like that.
Do you think we're in the clear for other extreme shortages?
Great question. I would say extreme shortages, yes. Right now, it appears that more on a supply chain backlog is an issue that we're seeing more these days. There's a couple manufacturers that are also starting to look at, the allocation model once again, or at least watching, orders very closely as they increase the back half of this year. But really, products available. The key is being able to be responsible with ordering and get orders in a very timely manner, so that manufacturers can really forecast, what that demand is going to look like in the back half of this year.
How has the pandemic changed go-to-market strategies for CPG companies?
Wow, it's been an interesting time for sure. And, I would say the overall strategies long-term really haven't changed as much as one might think. But I want to mention a couple of trends. For some time, during the pandemic, we saw promotions completely suppressed. So, it just didn't make sense to have promotions out there with allocations. But that's really come back now to just about where it was, like, say, in 2019. I would also say that, a newer trend is limiting the number of SKUs, limiting the number of packages a consumer can buy when they're in store, is much more prevalent than it was, 18 months ago. That's kind of stayed around, stayed around. And I would say one final one, total SKU count, went down dramatically as far as production goes during the pandemic. So most paper manufacturers made a smart decision to cut back on number of SKUs they produce, really focusing on the big hitters, right? The big players that sell the majority of the products out there. And now we've seen slowly over time that start coming back as we've come off the paper shortages out there. So all the major manufacturers are producing pretty much close to what they produced back in 2019 as far as SKU count as well too. It's a few less than it was back then, a little bit of efficiencies, but overall that's come back as well.
How do you think the hardware and home improvement channel specifically have handled the lingering supply chain issues?
I'd say the hardware channels handled it fairly well. All channels that we work with out there source paper products from several manufacturers, created a lot of new partnerships during the pandemic, just to find, new sources of paper during that time. In some cases, those retailers, whether it's in the hardware side or grocery, mass, et cetera, are still struggling with some of those inventories. So, in a lot of cases, retailers and wholesalers would buy, I would say, lower quality products just to be able to fill their shelves when others couldn't, provide. And are now trying to work through still some of those inventories out there as well too. But I think overall that the hardware channel, from my experience, has handled it very well.
Are there any new forecasting strategies being used by CPG companies to help predict future demand?
I would say with paper, we're using the same models that we did before. 2020, in so many ways, was an anomaly. If you think about it, we had exponential sales. We sold as much as we could produce, during that time. And then, there were so many new entrants during the year as well too. So it's almost hard to look at, any data from that time frame. Basing, your future demand, et cetera, on 2020 really will most likely leave you with a very unbalanced, supply chain and inventory. So what we've recommended and suggested really, and what we do is stick to what 2019 looks like, and then also add a growth factor for 2021, but also really into 2022 as well. 2021 it had its own challenges too. It was a very uneven year as well, but kind of suppressed sales the first half of the year and then growth in the back half. So it's not what I would term as a normal year either.
Manufacturers are already creating plans on how to comp the growth we saw from 2020 through today. What advice do you have for other CPG companies or partners balancing growth and these supply constraints?
A great question. And kind of just to piggyback on what I said and with your last question too, is that, most CPG companies, not just CPG companies, but the wholesalers I work with, the retailers, the whole entire supply chain really has focused more on 2019 as a benchmark, and then really project 2 years out as we head into 2022 to really get a good idea. That has its own challenges too, with new entrants and new trends and things. You have to take that into consideration. But really, the best benchmark you can look at is 2019 to look even into next year.
Clint, thank you so much for your time and all of your insights. We wish you the best of luck in the future and hope to talk again soon.
Thanks, Ashley. Really appreciate your time as well.